Well, the Department of Education announced 16 finalists Thursday in the first round of its Race to the Top competition, which will deliver $4.35 billion in school reform grants. The finalists were selected from a pool of 41 applicants and include Colorado, Delaware, the District of Columbia, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, Louisiana, Massachusetts, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Carolina, and Tennessee. Education Secretary Arne Duncan said, quote, "These states are an example for the country of what is possible when adults come together to do the right thing." The winners will be chosen in April and a second round of applications accepted in June. The Washington Post reports that all the first-round finalists, except for Delaware and South Carolina, received financial help from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in preparing their Race to the Top application. The foundation gave many states grants of up to $250,000 each to pay for a consultant to help them craft their application. While protests around cuts to public education took place across the state, California learned it was among the 25 states rejected in the first round. Governor Schwarzenegger said the decision from the Education Council showed that, quote, "We need to be more aggressive and bolder in reforming our education system."
Well, for a critical appraisal of Race to the Top and the Obama administration's approach to education reform, we're joined by a woman who's long been known as an advocate of No Child Left Behind, charter schools, standardized testing, and using the free market to improve schools. But she's had a radical change of heart in recent years. I'm talking about the influential education scholar Diane Ravitch. She was Assistant Secretary of Education and Counselor to Education Secretary Lamar Alexander under President George H.W. Bush, and appointed to the National Assessment Governing Board under President Clinton. She's the author of over 20 books. She's research professor of education at New York University and a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Her latest book chronicles how and why she decided to break with the conservative education policies she once championed. It's called The Death and Life of the Great American School System: How Testing and Choice Are Undermining Education. Diane Ravitch, welcome to Democracy Now! With this latest news, what is your assessment of where we are going under the Obama administration?
Well, unfortunately, the Obama administration has adopted and is building on the foundation of No Child Left Behind. And as I explain in this book, I believe that No Child Left Behind has been a failed policy, that it's dumbed down the curriculum, narrowed the curriculum. Kids are being denied a full education because so much time is being spent on test prep and on tests that are really not very good tests, and in some cases even fraudulent scoring of the test, that the kids are getting a worse education as a result of No Child Left Behind. The Obama administration, however, has bought into this rhetoric of accountability and choice, and they're actually taking the Bush policies to a greater extreme. There is more support from the administration, this administration, for choice because they have no opposition in the Congress, because it's a Democratic president, and because they had all this money, this $5 billion to use as play money with no authorization, no oversight from Congress. They've said to the states in the Race to the Top, this competition that was just held, that the requirements to be considered are, first of all, that the states have to be committed to privatizing many, many, many public schools. These are called charter schools. They're privatized schools. The Bush administration would have never gotten away with that because Congress would have stopped them. They've also required states to commit to evaluating teachers by the test scores of their students, which means that that'll put even more emphasis on standardized testing, more drill down of test prep, more emphasis on basic skills. And also it's a very unfair measure because it means that the students who live in poor communities, that they're likely to get small gains, whereas the kids in the affluent communities will get big gains. And so we'll see the third emphasis of the Obama plan, which is close low-performing schools. And Obama has said that he wants to see 5,000 low-performing schools transformed or closed, as we saw just recently on Rhode Island, where the only high school in a desperately poor community is supposed to fire all the teachers, close the school. And I think this is a terrible thing for public education. I think we're going to see a devastation of public education over the next, however long this president is in office, unless he changes course, which I hope he will, and doubt that he will.
One of the things that fascinated me as I was going through your book last night was how you've traced historically how the leaders of both political parties over the last few decades. It was the same way under Bill Clinton, that the Democrats and Republicans have reached sort of a consensus on what they call school reform. And when you were in the Department of Education under George H.W. Bush, you had an idea of school reform that was based on the curriculum, strengthening the content of the education, not the bells and whistles and the structures for measurements, but that was actually defeated, and that Lynn Cheney had something to do with that. Could you talk about that and bring us some of that history?
Well, when I went to work for the Department of Education, I came in as a Democrat, and I thought somewhat naively that education was somehow a nonpartisan issue. And so I came in to work on the idea of promoting arts education, science education, and in the department, part of the department I was in, we gave grants to different professional associations of educators to develop voluntary national standards in the arts, science, history, geography, economics, civics, lots of different areas. We wanted people, educators across the country, to say, this is what an education is, this is what all American children should have. It was not a race to the top. It was based on the idea of equal educational opportunity means that all children get these wonderful things. But I think that within the Bush administration, the more important dialogue that was going on that I was just very peripheral to was the idea of school choice. Vouchers, charter schools, and then also accountability. And where the Democrats and the Republicans began to make common cause was around this theme of accountability. And what accountability ultimately meant, not just in the Bush administration, but in the Clinton and now in the Obama, in the first, next Bush and then this administration. Accountability means who should be punished. If the scores don't go up, who should be punished? Teachers. Teachers should be punished. The union should be demonized. But you asked me about Lynn Cheney. The reason that Lynn Cheney gets into this conversation is that she was the one who saw that the history standards were, she attacked them, and there got to be a huge national brouhaha back in 1994, 1995 about whether the history standards were politically correct. And it caused such an uproar in the press with, the right-wing talk show host jumped all over it, and then you had people on the left defending it. Congress and the administration just said, and this was in the Clinton administration years, they said, let's not touch this whole idea of standards. Let's just stick with basic skills. And that's how we today have inherited this legacy of the only thing you're allowed to really talk about is reading and math. Don't touch science, the arts. They're all too controversial. You might get into an argument over evolution if you try to talk about science.
But you also say that in many state curriculums that have been developed now, even in reading, it's more about the functions of reading than the actual content of the literature that people are reading?
I mean, this is, to most people, it would come as a shock if you pick up your state standards and you say, well, where's the literature? Because what they talk about is strategies and processes and previewing and reviewing and predicting, and you think, well, aren't kids getting good literature? Aren't they reading the great stuff, the world literature, American literature, English literature, Spanish literature? No, it's not there, because if you make a choice about literature, then choosing this means you're not choosing something else, therefore choose nothing at all.
Diane Ravitch, what caused your